Hey everyone, Jonathan Bailor back, and uniquely excited about today's show, listeners, because we have a gentleman with us who very, very unique, very wise gentleman, and he recently wrote a blog post. I mean, he's been writing for many moons, has done amazing things. We'll talk about his website here in a second. You can check out and learn more about the things he's done. But he wrote a very open and honest blog post recently called "How I Cured My Anxiety," which resonated so deeply with me. And I think will resonate deeply with many of you that I had to bring him on the show to share this insight. His name is Charlie Hoehn, and you can learn more about him at charliehoehn.com. He's done numerous things. He travels all around the world. He is an old soul because while he is young, he is wise, ridiculously wise. And I brought him on the show to share some of that wisdom with us today. Charlie, brother, how are you? And thank you for coming on the show.
Fantastic, especially after that intro. My self-confidence is through the roof now. Thank you very much for having me.
Well, Charlie, I know you wrote this back in May, so it's not that recent, but let's just, I don't want to beat around the bush here. You wrote this blog post called "How I Cured My Anxiety." Can we talk a bit about your story, how you became anxious, and then let's dig into how you cured it.
Sure. So for a few years, I was working with a number of best-selling authors, and I worked full-time for Tim Ferriss, the guy who wrote The 4-Hour Workweek, The 4-Hour Body. And in December of 2011, I believe it was roughly then, I decided I'd had enough. I wasn't really keeping my body in check. I wasn't taking good care of myself. I wasn't getting enough sleep. And then a bunch of external events kind of hit all at once. Like a close friend of mine attempted suicide. And I felt like I'd kind of outgrown the work and I was ready to do my own thing. And so I quit, which was terrifying to me because everyone around me, friends and family and blog readers of mine, were constantly patting me on the back for being in that position, for working for this really successful author. And I just didn't dig who I was at that time. And so quitting that was pretty scary, but removing that, which had been a pretty big part of my identity, kind of threw me into this realm of not knowing who I was or where I was going or what I was doing. And so I just basically spent months of going around trying to figure out what I was going to do next without going into a job that was like the same thing as what I'd been doing. And I remember going to see my doctor because my anxiety was so bad that when a couple of friends of mine had visited, I couldn't drink a glass of water. I couldn't hold it because every time I did, my hands shook so violently that it spilled. And I just felt scared and afraid and tired and paranoid all the time. And it was horrible. So I went to go see my doctor after trying all these different things to kind of heal myself because nothing really seemed to be helping. And she prescribed me, I think it was lorazepam. And I ran home to take these things because I was like so excited that potentially there was this magic pill that could help me get over it. And I right before I took it, I looked it up. I was like, what are these things? And I found out like these things were more addictive than heroin. They stopped working after a week. And there were all these people who were addicted to it who still had crippling anxiety. And so I spent basically a year of feeling horribly anxious and finally found a way to cure it, which brought you to the post.
So, Charlie, I know it's not easy to relive this, and it sounds like you practiced. I mean, ironically, you worked for Tim, brilliant guy. One of the things he talks about in his work, which I think has so influenced all of us, the 4-hour work week, is the E Elimination. So you practiced elimination, and then you experience this anxiety. And one thing I've noticed, Charlie, before we get into the cure, is the cause, quote unquote, cause of anxiety. I've often found that it's impossible to be anxious if you don't care. And in fact, the more you care, the more you feel, of course, please correct me if I'm wrong, the more you feel like you're here to do something important. And maybe there's a dissonance. Like, I know I'm supposed to be oftentimes helping people, and I'm not doing that right now. And in fact, you care so deeply that cognitive dissonance becomes so powerful, it turns into a crippling anxiety, which is, of course, horrible. But it seems to be a symptom of something underlying, which is so promising, which is you have such a deep passion and caring that if you're not executing that, you're put into this other state. What do you think about that?
I totally agree with that. A big part of me was like, man, I've done all this cool stuff. I've gotten all this momentum, and I'm in this amazing position to do whatever I want. And I was just like paralyzed because I didn't know what to do after. And it was like this giant letdown of what I was supposed to become. I thought the answer was just I don't know. I was let down by myself for not knowing and not doing more. And it's a completely, I mean, it's not entirely because I'm super hard on myself or that's the way I am. I think it's a product of the culture we grow up in. Like, America's really intense. Like, we work crazy amounts of hours, and we all want to be like number one at everything. And so there's just this underlying, I don't know, this underlying thing that all of us experience, which is if we're not succeeding, if we're not having everything together at any given time and doing perfectly at everything, then we're a failure in everyone's eyes. And I think that kind of intense pressure, I mean, you look at Facebook and you look at Instagram, and all you see are positive things. It's very rare to see somebody being like, I'm going through an internal crisis here, throw me a lifeline. No one does that because we only want to show the world like the best parts of ourselves. We're constantly editing and only showing the best parts. And so that creates this, this constant sense that if you're not doing it right, then you're failing. And that's really tough.
It made me think of a definition of anxiety. I'm not sure where I got this from, but that feeling of anxiety, and Charlie, I'm curious, again, your perspective here, because I know you've thought very deeply about this, and it seems to be a reflection of what you just said, where we feel anxiety when we believe that things externally are not as they should be.
Yeah. It's this desire to have things. I forget the exact definition I came across a while back, but it was effectively that. It was the desire to have things be the way that they aren't. And this constant sense, this constant fear that a drastic change is about to happen. That never comes.
Yeah. It reminds me also of there's a anecdote that Wayne Dyer, who certainly has much wisdom to share, once said, and it was the definition of neuroticism, which is not the same thing as anxiety, but let's call them cousins. And again, being we're all we all have some anxiety. We're all to some level neurotic. No one's perfect, right? So these are no way criticisms or anything we should feel bad about. But I love this definition where he said someone who is just fully functioning. If you ask them what 1 + 1 equals, they will say 2. This is totally sane, functioning, perfect person. If you ask someone who is totally crazy what 1 + 1 equals, they'll say purple elephant, right? Like just something totally that doesn't make any sense. And if you ask someone who maybe is suffering from a bit of anxiety or is feeling a bit neurotic, what's 1 + 1? They'll say, I know it's 2, but like, why does it have to be 2? Couldn't it be something else?
or like, I'm sorry if that's wrong. I'm really sorry.
I'm really sorry. I think it's 2.
Yeah.
Oh man. Well, so how did you start to pull yourself out of this place of anxiety?
So there were a number of things that really helped. I mean, the basics are like, I mean, I didn't cover this as much in my post, but if you don't have the fundamentals like working, like you're on a regular sleep schedule where you're getting plenty of sleep, that will help you tremendously. If you're exhausting yourself through exercise, not going out and running 20 miles every day, because that's horrible for you. But if you're like lifting weights, heavy weights for an hour, a few times per week, and that will help your sleep as well. And if your diet's clean, you get rid of the stimulants like caffeine and the depressants like alcohol. If you minimize that stuff and have a relatively clean diet, those 3 areas will help you tremendously. They will calm your body down a lot. Exercise especially is really helpful. But the thing that really had the most transformative impact on me was remembering, after I read this book called Play by Stuart Brown, remembering what I'd been like growing up as a kid and approaching the world through the lens of play rather than work or taking myself really, really seriously. Because when you're a kid, you literally cannot approach the world seriously unless you're forced to by your parents, unless you're told to, unless you're taught to approach the world very seriously. Everything's a game. Everything's play when you're a kid. And it should be that way throughout our entire lives. But for some reason or another, we tend to make things very, very serious and treat life very, very seriously, even though we were just kind of plopped up out of the earth, like this magical existence that we all go through. Is why would we treat that so seriously? Why would you make your brain into a prison rather than a playground? And it just made me realize, it made me think, like, the way I'd been treating my life was through the lens of work and seriousness. And thinking back on, I say this in the post, but like, have you ever seen a little kid running for miles on a treadmill? Have you ever seen a kid meeting up with their friends to chat over coffee? Have you ever seen a little kid go to conferences to hand out their business cards? No, like that stuff sucks. And like treating life that way really sucks. And especially if you're surrounded by people who do treat life that way, because you start to think, oh, this is normal. This is how adults are supposed to be. This is how life is supposed to be. It must be very serious. Otherwise, you can't get through it. And you'll never be able to get a house and never be able to have kids and send them off to college and retire and all that American dream nonsense that was created by marketers. It's all supposed to be a ride. It's all supposed to be fun. And why would you treat it as anything but that? And so remembering that was tremendously and almost instantly liberating. It helped me breathe easier. I went through the things that I used to play when I was a kid, the games that I used to play, and the things that I constantly returned to. And actually, it was really cool because it gave me a chance. It gave me an excuse to call up these childhood friends that I hadn't talked to in like over a decade. And I would call them and I'd say, hey man, like I just wanted to connect and ask you, like, what do you remember us doing? And I had these amazing conversations with old friends of mine, and we were just laughing hysterically, because we remembered. I used to pull pranks like a maniac, like I was obsessed with getting under people's skin and making them laugh at themselves and like stop being serious. And all these obsessions that I used to have as a kid that I would just do naturally. No one would force me to do this stuff. It just was like stuff that I would get so obsessed with. I started bringing that back into my life, those elements. And it was free, it was fun, it was painless, and it helped me so much.
Charlie, I'm getting goosebumps again like I did when I read the post, because there was so much that I think resonates with so many here. And like you use the term play, yeah, which I think is brilliant. And I think there is, of course, always correct me if I misrepresent things, but even some synonyms for that. Like, for example, in my work, sometimes I work in the field of health and wellness, and always love to talk about how like what we're after is health and living better. It's not being right. Like so much of a conversation, and for example, like the eating and exercise realm, are people arguing about what's correct, right, what's right, what's better. Like we're not put here to be right. I mean, maybe like if that's how you want to live, but like why so serious? Why not just say, if what you're doing is making you feel great, keep it up. And if it's not, try something else. And if you're just live better. Don't try to be right. Just be happy. It seems that's what you're saying.
Or just be. Take the pressure off. Part of the pitfalls of being a guy is like you just said, like this need to be right. This need to be logical and rational about everything. And something that women are much better at, I think, is just being in touch with their feelings and emotions. Because for guys, it's actually, I don't know if women are really aware of this, but for guys, it's like, it's really tough to admit to our feelings and vulnerabilities and emotions. Like we don't really talk to each other about that stuff, because when we hang around our guy friends, for the most part, like we're all just giving each other a hard time, or we're just joking around with each other. We don't really get into the deeper stuff because we don't talk as much, for one, and it's always kind of shot down as like that's a weakness, or that makes me uncomfortable, or so it's just not as explored really. And so you just kind of fall in line with, okay, I want to still fit into the group. And guys are very analytical, very rational, very logical, and logic doesn't always line up with feelings. Mm-hmm. And what you're feeling is a much better compass than the thoughts that your brain comes up with.
And Charlie, what do you define as play for adults, or is it any different for adults? Like when you play, and if listeners wanted to play, what would we do?
Let's see. So it's obviously different for everybody. So for me, like the play thing to me is just a mindset. It's how you view the world. Like this world my life is a ride. It's something I can lean into. It's something I can embrace. It's not something that if it pokes me in the chest, I'm going to collapse and shatter. You know, this is a ride, so it's going to be bumpy. It's going to be fun. It's something, you know, like when you're a kid, you run around and you're not afraid of hitting your head against a table or something. Like when it happens, you cry and then it's over and then you go back to playing. Like for some reason as adults, we tense up because we realize, oh my God, everyone's watching us. And like, or so we think, even though no one cares, you know? So for me, like I say, in the post, like, I started doing, I used to play this every day when I was a kid. I used to do home run derby in my backyard where a friend and I, or just myself, I would just toss up tennis balls and hit them with a bat. Cause I grew up with a field behind my house. And, right now, I live, this might anger some women to hear this, but one of my good friends is a guy named Tucker Max. I'm actually living with him right now, and I've been traveling around. But before I traveled, he and I would go play home run derby at a high school baseball field every weekend. We'd go out there with a bat and play, and it was a blast. Like for me, that's a blast. Just hitting stuff with a stick is fun. But like I said, like pranks are really fun to me. I was obsessed with stand-up comedy. I did improv comedy. This is something actually I can recommend to pretty much everybody. Improv comedy. You sign up for that. And if you have crippling social anxiety, you will listen to that recommendation and be like, that is my personal nightmare. I thought so too. Improv comedy encapsulates the concept of play better than pretty much anything I've come across. Like you are going into every situation with the guarantee of looking foolish and failing. Like every single situation they put you in, you're like, this is impossible. I'm going to look stupid. And after a while, you turn off the thoughts in your brain and you just go into autopilot and you say, you know, I'm going to have this energy going into this. I'm not even going to think about what's coming out of my mouth. That's going to go, I'm not even going to think about it. It's just whatever comes out of my mouth is either going to work or it's not, or it's not going to work. And once you reach that point, which for me happened in about the third week, I was taking a 6-week course, 3 hours each week. In the third week, I finally had that breakthrough where I was like, I don't care. Throw me into this situation. I'm going to fail, but it's going to be fun. I don't care what I look like. I'm with a group of people who doesn't care if I fail. And that kind of carried over into every interaction I would have from then on, because I would like to mess with people. You know, I would like to play with them and see how they responded. And some people in the real world, you know, baristas and waiters and stuff, they snap out of it for a second. And they're like, oh, you know, they'll play back with you. But others are like weirded out, like, how could you not be serious? You know, it's like, it's just fun. You just play around with people and you can approach every interaction and every moment of your life like that as improv comedy, because that's all it is. All you have is that moment right now. You don't have the future to worry about. You don't have the past to regret, because both are illusions. They're gone, they're done, or they haven't happened. All you have is that moment, which is a chance to improvise and create the world that you want right in that moment.
Charlie, you literally just encapsulated it right there, because what else is life other than improv?
Exactly.
I mean, that really is what it is. And on the other end of things, you mentioned, you know, there's some people that aren't going to get it. And that reminds me of one of my favorite philosophers, the great Dr. Seuss.
Yes.
Right. He has the amazing line, those who, and I might invert it here, but those who mind don't matter, and those who matter don't mind. So not only does play make you happier, but if you find that there are others who refuse to play, man, that's a great way to separate those who you might want to be spending your time with from those who you might not want to be spending your time with. What do you think?
Totally, 100%. And a quick side note on Dr. Seuss, he has another quote, which I included in that post, which is, adults are just obsolete children. And I totally agree with what you just said. And once I had this kind of revelation about play, I realized, like, man, my favorite friends growing up, the people that I always wanted to be around, were the best playmates. They were the ones who liked playing the games that I liked to play, and they were good at them. And they made me want to do more of them. So like the people that I would make sketch comedy movies with, just for fun, they were the people who didn't take life seriously. They were the people who could make me laugh. And I mean, that's what I look for in like a girlfriend. It used to be like, who is the most beautiful? Like, who's going to impress my friends if I have this around my arm? Now I just look for who is going to be the most fun to play with. And if you approach your businesses that way, like, how can you not have fun? How could that not bleed over into the quality of your work? Like, we pay, the stuff that we pay for in life is the product of another person's play. Music, art, sports, cooking. Like, the people who are great at what they do, even architecture, are the people who approach it with a sense of play and imagination and creativity. And play is what helps you bond with other human beings. So play is what destroyed my anxiety faster than everything else. It was almost instantaneous.
Charlie, I so appreciate you sharing this with me and our listeners, because it really is so profound, and just, we all just take a step back and say, and Charlie, it's not just you and me saying this. Like, I was just reminded me of like traditions that date thousands of years. Like, if you look at an Ayurvedic tradition, right? It's very much this just be. Even if you look at like Judeo-Christian tradition of, unless you act as if a child, you will not enter the kingdom of heaven. I mean, there is this sense of play and joy and just be, and be with, I mean, even like the primal paleo movement now is like, be with nature, be one. Let's get back to basics. Like, let's simplify a little bit. Let's have some fun. And that's pretty awesome.
Yeah. 100%. Yeah.
Well, Charlie, in terms of having fun, I know, now you're playful, you're enjoying life, and you have this wonderful platform and obviously an amazing mind. What's next for you?
What's next for me is what I've been working on for the past 9 months, which I've had to approach with the sense of play, but has been the exact opposite of physical play. Has been writing. I've been writing a book on how to get a job that you love and how you can actually approach your career with a sense of play. And I've started this book way before I wrote that post. This has been an idea I've had for the last 5 years. And it was basically how I was able to land all these fun, cool gigs. And I wrote an ebook on the same topic 4 years ago called Recession Proof Graduate. And never really expected it to take off, but it helped a lot of people. And now the idea is fully formed and going to make that into a book.
Charlie, when you said I've been spending the last nine months, I thought you were going to say something completely different. I thought maybe there was another little Charlie on the way.
Oh man, no. Yeah, this has been an intellectual pregnancy, not an actual pregnancy, thankfully.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, Charlie, thank you so much. When can we expect that work to be available?
So I've gotten feedback from about 6 editors in the last week or so, and I'm going to plow through it over the next 2 weeks and shape it into the next working one. I'm long story short, I'm hoping by the end of the year for sure.
I love it. We'll certainly be on the lookout for it. And folks, please, we only scratched the surface of Charlie and obviously the wisdom he has to offer. You can learn more about him at his website, which is charliehoehn.com, but it's spelled Hoehn. And Charlie, just one quick thing I wanted to mention here is you mentioned, and this might, who knows, we might have to cut this out. We'll see. So you mentioned the wildly successful author and entertainer, Tucker Max. And the reason and that you live with him, and the reason I want to call this out is folks who are familiar with Tucker Max or who will become familiar with Tucker Max after visiting your site, I want you to, one, understand, like, listen to this podcast again. And like, Charlie lives with Tucker. You can see what kind of a guy Charlie is. And I bet Tucker is very, very similar. And I bet if we all just were a little bit more playful, like Charlie said, we could find those similarities. We could celebrate those similarities, and we could focus on what we like and what we enjoy in people rather than what might just be slightly different than our style. And Charlie, I so appreciate you coming on the show because you are living proof that although we may write one thing or do another thing, at the core, man, we all just want to play and get hugged, right?
Exactly.
Like that's all we want.
Yeah, exactly. It's funny. I've had a few people, or I've read a few comments that are like, you know, I agree with what you said about curing anxiety. I thought it was good, but you live with Tucker Max. I don't know how I feel about that. It's something to that effect. And like Tucker's writing is pretty, or his old stuff is pretty polarizing to say the least. But I mean, I've known the guy for 4 years, and I can 100% say he's been one of the most loyal, best supportive friends I could have ever imagined having. And he's changed a lot from when he wrote that stuff. But yeah.
It's awesome. Charlie, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us today, brother. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. This was awesome.
Folks, his name is Charlie Hoehn, rhymes with phone, as I told you at the beginning of the interview.
Yeah.
I hope you enjoyed today's chat as much as I did. And listeners, please remember, this week and every week after, eat smarter, exercise smarter, based on our chat with Charlie, play and live better. Chat with you soon.